Coming up on the Otago Opportunity today, we're talking food, and more importantly, food resilience. How would you feed yourself if disaster struck?
This is the Otago Opportunity, a limited series look at the future of our province. I'm your host, Pauline Moore, and in this series, we're taking the policies of the Opportunity Party and moving them out of the Wellington think tank and into our own backyard here in Dunedin. Each week we'll hear from local business owners, students and families about how a tax reset or a citizens' assembly would actually impact their daily lives. It's not about the politics, it's about the future of the place we call home. Welcome to the Otago Opportunity.
Kia ora, welcome to the Otago Opportunity podcast. Our regular host Pauline Moore is away this week. I'm Dave Bainbridge-Zafar, the Opportunity Party candidate for Dunedin. And joining me today is the chair of our food network, Robyn Zink. Kia ora, Robyn.
Kia ora, thank you very much, David. Lovely to be here.
And joining myself and Robyn, we've got Sarah Gell, formerly of Good Food Dunedin. Welcome, Sarah.
Kia ora, team.
So Pauline Moore is away this week, so I'm going to be stepping into the host chair. But we'll start off with you, Robyn. Do you want to tell us a little bit about our food network, what it is, what it does, and why you've got involved?
So our food network emerged from a series of community hui back in 2012, and a number of people in the community were concerned about the food resilience, our local food resilience, and working in that space since then in a whole range of ways. And one of the ways actually was by to lobby the Dunedin City Council to take a more active role in food resilience, and that's where Good Food Dunedin came from originally. We've worked a lot in the community space, supporting community gardens. One of the things that we've been doing is the community fruit harvest, which is organising volunteers to pick excess fruit from householders' backyards and then distributing that across food banks and community Pātaka Kai and various other community organisations. Quite an important part of our work more recently has been trying to get more people curious about our food system and understanding what's behind the food on our supermarket shelves. So we have a vision of Otipoti as a strong, well-connected local food system that nurtures the well-being and resilience of communities and the environment. And we're basically working from the principle that healthy, resilient communities need healthy, resilient food systems.
Cool, thanks, Robyn. So when we talk food resilience, we're talking about the ability of a community like Dunedin, like Otago, to be able to feed itself, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think COVID and more recently some of the geopolitical things that are happening in the world is really highlighting how fragile our supply chains are, and increasingly more and more of our food is actually coming from either other regions or other parts of the world. So we're actually really reliant on those supply chains, and so I think people are starting to become a bit more aware of, hey, could we actually feed ourselves in Otago? And back in the 50s, there were about 150 hectares, 50s and 60s, 150 hectares of vegetables grown on the Taieri Plains. And now we have, I think, 3 small growers of about half a hectare to a hectare each. So the amount of food that's grown locally has decreased significantly, and our population has increased. So it must mean that more and more of our food is coming from elsewhere, which makes us really vulnerable to those supply chain breakdowns.
Is that right? 150 hectares of vegetables grown in the 50s to what, 2-3 hectares maybe grown? Wow.
Yeah. And people tell me that the Sunday family excursion used to be to go over to the Taieri, and there were a whole lot of roadside stalls. So they'd go around the roadside stalls and buy their weekly vegetable groceries when they were on their family excursion out onto the Taieri.
Wow. So Sarah, you've spent the last few years with Good Food Dunedin, which is a Dunedin City Council programme, right? What's the focus of Good Food Dunedin?
Yeah, correct. So I've been role for just over 4 years. So yeah, that Good Food Dunedin sparked after the Christchurch earthquakes, and our food network came to public forums at the council, and the council decided that we were really quite vulnerable to food shocks, disruptions to our food supply. So Christchurch earthquake was a prime example of that, because we were cut off from our all the trucks coming down on our main highway. And it's the same for all of Otago and Southland. All of our food comes down from the main distribution hubs in Canterbury. And so we really don't have localised food systems to support us anymore. So council then established Good Food Dunedin, which sits within the Economic Development Department. And I think that's a really good place for it to be, because I think for us to be a food secure and food resilient our local communities to be food secure, we really need to have sectors that support us and support not only feed our communities but feed our economy too in a really sustainable way. How do we actually utilize our land in sustainable ways that are feeding our economy, our communities, and our whenua and our water, our wai?
So, Robyn, you talked about community gardens. How many community gardens are there across Dunedin, a place of 130,000 people?
I think we've got about 18 community gardens. We recently launched the community Kai map on our website, and that lists all the community gardens. So if people are curious to what's in our neighbourhood, they can go onto that community Kai map and see where their closest community garden are. And they range in size, and they also range in the ways that they function and operate, but essentially they're all run by volunteers. There are opportunities, they do grow food, but I see their primary function as bringing communities together and a place of sharing and learning.
And that's a big focus for our food network, right? It is connecting those dots between those kind of small-scale neighbourhood projects, yeah?
Oh, absolutely. As I said, most of them are run by volunteers, so people are really focused on their little piece of what they are doing, and often don't have the time and energy to look up to see what's going on around them. So one of the things that we keep hearing from people is they feel quite isolated in what they're doing. So we try and connect people up to it so they can share skills, knowledge, and resources, and also so that they can understand that actually I might just be doing my little thing here, but it's part of a much bigger thing. And when we start adding all of the actions and activities that are happening around Dunedin, actually we can see there's a lot happening to strengthen food resilience in our local community already.
And then, Sarah, I guess Dunedin City Council's role is to try and scale that, right? So what's Good Food Dunedin doing in terms of horticulture development over the next 5-10 years?
Totally. So I think our food network and Good Food Dunedin complement each other really well, because our food network is coming in to increase community resilience and creating food literacy within our communities, which is something that's a major issue at the moment with the globalization of our food system. People don't actually know where our food comes from, and they don't know what good nutrition looks like. And so our food network is really, really important to actually be educating our communities on where our food comes from, what good nutrition looks like, how we can access local food, and how can we grow our own food? What does a circular system looks like? Whereas Good Food Dunedin is on the other end of the spectrum, where we're looking at how do we actually help encourage business development and building different food sectors, food economies, so that people can have viable, sustainable businesses that work not just for the short term, but in the long term, that feed our communities. If we want sustainable food systems, we need those businesses to be in the green, because if they're working in the red, then they're not sustainable. So I've been working across a series of different pipelines, if you like, with the strongest, the most advanced of those pipelines being working on a horticulture program. So we've been working with Araitiuru Kōkiri Training Centre out in South Dunedin, which is essentially a small Māori polytechnic. And we've been working with them to develop an education pathway into market gardening. And that's not just teaching people how to be a market gardener and how to get their hands in the soil to grow some really awesome vegetables. organically, but it's also setting them up with business management skills. So how can they actually run a sustainable business? What does market analysis look like? How does customer engagement look like? Managing staff, managing land, and that's not just to build. That's not just to build a few market garden businesses, but to build them over time. And that would be done on an incubator farm. We've been working to get some land so that we can train up some some students out on that land and give them that wraparound knowledge for growing and running business, market garden business. We're also investigating things like our meat chain. So how can we actually have localized meat systems? So maybe a micro abattoir, small scale abattoir, mobile abattoir, something like that, so that we can actually process our meat that's been grown locally for our local communities. Because at the moment, none of our meat, we can't identify where it's come from, and it gets trucked all around the South Island. If it comes from the South Island, a lot of it is like increasingly coming from overseas now. Same with our dairy. So a lot of our dairy you'll see in the supermarket, not only is our butter really expensive, a lot of our butter that we're importing is from the US. Some of our local distributors that go to our hospitality sector and to all of our, one of the main distributors has been reporting having to import more because it's more affordable to import meat and dairy and that kind of thing from overseas because we're not set up for it locally anymore. And when I say local, I don't just mean for our local communities in Otago, I mean all of New Zealand is really, really struggling with the whole globalization effect. And that means, with the Watties closure in New Zealand, we're importing lots of frozen goods as well, frozen vegetables. And the reason they're so cheap from overseas is because a lot of them are grown from essentially slave labor. So we actually want to make moral decisions here as well. So how can we grow really strong food economies that actually captures more of our food spend locally so we can retain our dollars within our local economy for as long as possible and actually support businesses, business development, and strong local economies and communities.
I was going to ask a bit of a devil's advocate type question, but I think you may have already answered it. But is this not looking a little bit insular? What's wrong with having my mangoes grown in Pakistan and having my beef from Argentina, and even in New Zealand, kiwi fruit grown in Hawke's Bay? Some of these things you can't grow in Dunedin or in Otago. What's wrong with bringing in fruit and veg and even meat from all around the world? Why is that a problem?
Of course, we've grown quite accustomed to having variety in our diet, and that's not a problem. But we do want to be set up so that if the alpine fault goes, which it's likely to in the next 50 years, we've already had some earthquakes in Te Anau, and there was one up in the North Island recently. So we need to be well set up so that we can survive. Queenstown had some a food resilience report done a year or two ago, and it said that they'd need a jumbo jet coming in every 30 minutes or something full of supplies because they're not set up to supply food and basic necessary supplies to their
That's if the road network gets washed away or earthquaked away, so the road network is gone. And yeah, here in Otago we might be quite cut off because generally there is just kind of one road south. Correct. But so are we just talking food resilience for a few weeks or a few months to get us through that disaster period, or why do we need to feed ourselves all year round all the time?
Well, I just think definitely for that, if it's a matter of days or weeks, then yes, we will certainly need to be set up so that we can sustain ourselves. But actually there's an economic argument there that we can keep a lot of our money circulating within our local economy if we actually are buying local. So having more business development, of course, we're always looking to get more jobs, more businesses, more GDP for our local economy. So the food story, that's just one part, that's one slice of the pie, and everyone's got to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a couple of other elements to that as well. One is that the closer the food is grown to where it's eaten, the fresher the food is. And we need to shift the narrative around food. At the moment in this country, we just talk about food as a commodity, and primarily as an export commodity. Actually, food is not only a basic human right, it's the foundation of our health. So the fresher the food, the better it is for us.
And there's an argument, there's been so much research done that actually different growing methods, if you're using lots of pesticides or putting lots of synthetic fertilizers, or even just having food that's been cut and then is transported for long periods of time, it's actually diminishing the amount of nutrition that is in that item. So we want our communities to have that better food literacy of actually understanding what does this, where has this apple come from, and what does this mean for its nutritional content? Because apples are not always equal. Apples are not always apples. The nutritional content of food is really dependent on a lot of variables, and we need our communities to have better food literacy around that kind of thing. The shorter the time span between harvesting and eating the food, the higher the nutritional content. If things have a lot of pesticides on them, and each country has a different policies and laws around pesticide, how much pesticides that can go on things, but that impacts our health as well.
Yeah, I was in Woolworths, or Countdown as I still call it, the other day, and I was surprised to see the label on the bananas saying that they were a product of Ecuador, Mexico, or the Philippines, because I thought those three countries are not particularly close together. You should know whether it's come from Ecuador or the Philippines. But I guess that is a challenge, right? A lot of the food kind of gets mixed together in various production plants, packaging plants, and moved around, shipped all over the globe before it gets to my fruit bowl in my house.
And we also have very poor food labelling regulation and monitoring. So whenever I'm talking to people, I encourage them to go and have a look at what's in their pantry and try and identify where their food comes from. Most of the food labels on the products in New Zealand will talk about made from local and imported products. So you actually have no idea where our food has come from. So one of the things that we're advocating for is much clearer labelling. And I know in Europe, for example, there is much clearer food labelling. So people can start to make choices, because we're always saying buy local, but actually that's really, really difficult at the moment because of our labelling, food labelling here.
And obviously, I guess the ideal would be just growing it yourself at home. How much space do you need? What's the kind of minimum amount of space you need to grow something that you can eat?
Well, I think you can start with some herbs on your windowsill. Even that makes a difference, because they're fresh, they're not packaged and transported. So even if that's all you can manage, that is fantastic. And then a few tubs on the deck. It's amazing how much you can produce from a very small area, particularly those leafy greens. And one of the things I find, because I do grow quite a lot of vegetables in my own garden, is that I end up eating a lot more vegetables when I'm growing vegetables than if I'm just doing my weekly shop and haven't got anything in the garden. So yeah, you can scale it to whatever scale you need. One of the things we talk a lot about is people get hung up on this idea of self-sufficiency. We talk about community sufficiency. So it's about communities working together to ensure that we can produce the food that we need, because obviously not everyone can or is interested in growing, but they can contribute into that ecosystem in some other way.
So you organise crop swaps and things like that? Yeah, which are fantastic community connectors and ways of learning. And Robyn, my wife and I had our first kind of veggie patches this year. We didn't do too well. We got some peas, but then I kind of forgot about everything else, and it kind of all got a bit overgrown. What are you growing at home? What would you recommend people grow in their veggie patch in Dunedin? What grows well down here?
Well, peas do grow well, and I have to say last summer was very challenging. A lot of brassicas, a lot of those Chinese vegetables grow really well in my garden at the moment. Fennel's looking very good. So I think it's about a matter of thinking, well, what do I like to eat, and then going and having a look at what grows in your neighbour's gardens, because that's always a good indicator of what might grow in your garden.
And Sarah, I've eaten all sorts of fruit from your mum's garden because I used to work with your mum. What are you growing anything? Would you recommend growing anything in particular?
Absolutely. I'm a strong advocate for having home gardens. I think it brings a lot of additional joys and health benefits to your life, and it gets you out into the sun, it gets you vitamin D, you get good bacteria into your skin and under your fingernails, you ingest in certain ways the good bacteria, which is really good for your gut biome. That being said, I do think it's really unrealistic for us to expect everyone to grow all their own food, or at least some of their own food. I think in today's day and age, a lot of families that are struggling to put food on the table do not have time for vegetable gardens. I think it's a novelty that some of us have, and I would encourage people to do so, especially with families and families with small children. It's a really awesome activity to do as a family, but I do strongly advocate for accessing local wherever possible, not necessarily in your backyard. That being said, always have a herb garden. It's so handy. Always plant some kale seeds in your garden and you'll have kale for all year round, and silver beet. I love my silver beet and my kale. Tomatoes are my pride and joy. I love having fresh tomatoes in the summertime. And I'm an avid forager. I like foraging a lot of my food. Every year I make a lot of jam, and a lot of that is with foraged fruit. You've just got to know what you're looking for.
It was one of my early experiences when I just moved to Dunedin. I was in New World, just near Botanic Gardens, and I was looking for the garlic, and someone leaned over and whispered, "There's garlic in the Botanic Gardens. You can go and take some." And I was like, "I don't think you're supposed to." And I was looking for it on the shelf. I'm good, thank you though.
Can I also just promote local legend Jason Ross, lives out in Waitati, and he's got a growing calendar which you can buy off him, or I think there's maybe a link to it online somewhere. But he's got a Dunedin specific growing calendar so that we know what grows really well in Dunedin, when to sow your seeds or plant your seedlings. That's a really awesome resource to use. Obviously, it's got some things are a little bit specific to your garden. Make sure you're planting in really sunny spots, and build up your soil. Do all your home composting. You don't need to rely on DCC to compost your green waste for you, when you can dig a hole in your garden and plant it yourself, and then you've got really great soil to plant into in the next season.
I'll find that growing calendar and include it in a link with this episode. But as we look to wrap up, Sarah, if I can ask you first to kind of look into the future, what's kind of one thing that's happening now or happening soon that you think we should be really excited about here in Dunedin?
Well, I'm really excited about these programs coming out of Enterprise Dunedin, the Good Food Dunedin portfolio, with the horticulture space and red meat, and maybe even dipping into some other things, food and fibre related. But also we've had in the last 2 years, we've had some really epic hui with local growers and food resilience activators. I just came down last month from one in Rotorua, where there was an amazing group of people that are all fighting the same battle here, and we're really more joined up nationally now. And so I think we're really gearing up for something for more local food communities and local food economies. So I think just watch this space, because things are going to change. People just need to support local.
And Robyn, if someone's listening and they're not quite ready yet to go and plant some potatoes or some kale or some silver beet or whatever, what can they do? Where can they go to get more involved in the local food network?
There's a whole range of things they can do. So we're just in the process of launching a food co-op, which is a co-op specifically designed to support our local growers. So rather than being customer focused, it's grower focused, and where the rationale behind this is to provide growers with a guaranteed income so that they can, with surety and confidence, either employ extra staff or invest in equipment and expand their growing, the amount of food that they're growing, knowing that they are going to have this income coming in on a regular basis. So and if people are interested in that, they can get in touch with our food network. Other ways they can get involved is talk to politicians. This is a fantastic time to be talking to politicians, both our local our council politicians and people like yourself. When we really advocate for, one of the things we really need in this country is both a national and regional food policy. We have no food policies in this country. We have no plan on how we can ensure that we can feed ourselves in this country, and that's something we desperately need. And we desperately need that on a regional scale as well. So I'd really encourage people to go and talk to politicians right now about that.
Always happy to listen on behalf of the politicians. You just mentioned one thing there, Robyn, around feeding ourselves as a country, and it's often trotted out that New Zealand feeds 50 million people. Can we feed ourselves as a country?
No, we can't. I've heard various figures, and you probably know this better than I do, Sarah, but we import about 50% of our food, I think. We produce enough dairy to supply the daily dietary dairy requirements for about 40 million people. Unfortunately, a lot of that dairy gets converted into processed and highly processed food, into what we commonly term as junk food. So even though it might leave our shores as high quality, nutritious food, it gets turned into this other product that's effectively killing us. So yes, it's a bit of a misnomer or a stretch, this idea that we can feed 40 million people. We can with dairy, but not with anything else. And one of the figures that I've seen more recently is that we grow enough vegetables in this country to feed about 2 million people. So there's actually a real gap there.
Wow. Well, we're about out of time. So Robyn, thank you so much for joining us. Sarah, thank you for joining us as well. I'm going to try and leave our listeners with a cliffhanger. Sarah, I understand you was telling me just before we started recording, you're off to Peru pretty soon. Is that right?
I am indeed.
I spent Christmas Day 1999 unconscious in Peru. And our listeners will have to tune in next week to find out why that was. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, David.
Thank you. Join us again next week. By H.Cargo, Secretary at opportunity.org.nz.